Thank you so much, Lori. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the 2023 Subrecipient webinar. My name is Reed Kottman, and I'm joined by Courtney Springer. I just wanted to echo Lori. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the toolbar. Both Courtney and I will be answering those as we go along. All right, so let's jump in. Just as a disclaimer, the contents of this presentation are intended to provide clarity regarding the existing requirements of the FTA and NTD. Please always feel free to refer to the statutes and regulations for the requirements. The goal of this webinar is to identify changes for the upcoming report year and to provide an overview of NTD reporting requirements and how to apply those requirements to the system. Again, this presentation has been created specifically for rural general public transit subrecipient reporters. All right, so here's the agenda for today. First, I will do a quick overview of the NTD, and then move on to important changes and clarifications for the 2023 report year. Next, we will review the fundamentals of NTD reporting, and we will discuss how to get started in the NTD reporting system. Then Courtney will take over and discuss how to complete the annual report, including some common reporting challenges. And then lastly, we will review the validation process. All right, here's the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you require technical assistance while completing your report, please reach out to your state. If you encounter any technical issues with the system, you may contact the FTA IT Help Desk. If you need assistance in accessing our published data products on our website, please feel free to email our help desk between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Courtney and I's contact information is listed here on the slide. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about this presentation. In addition to our contact information, we also wanted to provide the FTA program contacts here, Chelsea Champlin and Thomas Coleman. The key reference documents for NTD reporting are located mostly here. This will include the policy manual, of which an updated copy should be available on our website soon, the glossary, user guide, and the transit asset management guidebooks. First, we'll do a quick overview of the National Transit Database. What is the National Transit Database, or NTD? NTD was established to be the nation's primary source for information and statistics on all public transit modes in the United States. It's a source of data for performance measurement, benchmarking, as well as research. Recipients and subrecipients of Chapter 53 funds report to NTD. Subrecipients of State 5311 funds report data through their state's report. These subrecipients may include those that have received funding in the past and are still required to report based on continuing grant requirements, as well as some who report voluntarily that wish to receive Chapter 5311 funds in the future. All right, 5311 subrecipients and recipients are required to report due to grant requirements as stated here from the associated legislation. Data from NTD is used for several things. Some examples include performance benchmarking, as I mentioned earlier, research and statistic programs, formula apportionments for funding, and reports that are delivered to Congress. NTD data is due on the following dates: October 31st, January 31st, and April 30th. These are assigned depending on your agency's fiscal year end. Your state DOT may have internal deadlines that subrecipients must meet before the state submission due date, so please reach out to your state DOT if you have questions on your report's due date. We will now go into the changes and clarifications for report year 2023 that may affect your report for this upcoming year. First, we have the WE20 weekly reference reporting forms. A sample of reporters were selected to submit monthly submissions of data that represent a pre-selected week of service. This requirement only applies to selected agencies. So if your agency was not selected, you may disregard the requirement. Selected for the sample have already been notified by their NTD analyst and have submitted data. As you can see on the screen here, these are the reference weeks for the remainder of the 2023 calendar year. All All right, the next change for report year 2023 is the general feed specification, or GTFS, for fixed route modes. Rural subrecipients who operate fixed route modes will be asked to submit GTFS links in report year 2023. The GTFS link submitted to the NTD must be static and must not include any password protection. In other words, the links should be publicly accessible. After the initial submission of the GTFS links in report year 2023, agencies will be asked to certify their links are up to date year to year. If there are any changes to the fixed route service, the GTFS link should be updated accordingly. GTFS link should be uploaded via the new P50 form found in the Related Actions tab of your agency's profile page. If submitting a GTFS link on behalf of their subrecipients, states must submit at least one unique link or compressed file per NTD ID or multiple links. All GTFS links should be uploaded via the new P50 form found in the Related Actions tab. Oh, pardon, I'm repeating the last slide there. All GTFS links submitted to the NTD must contain agency, stops, routes, trips, stop times, and calendar or calendar dates text files. Feed info and shape files are optional, but we recommend them. Please ensure that all links are public and accessible. The Rural Transit Assistance Program, or RTAP for short, is a great resource for assistance with creating these GTFS feeds. We've included a link to their GTFS builder here on the slide. RTAP also offers live support for GTFS links on Thursdays between 1 and 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, the B15 form is also new for report year 2023. B15 will capture geospatial data for any demand response modes operated. If your agency operates multiple demand response modes, such as purchase transportation demand response and directly operated demand response, you'll be asked to complete a B15 for each. Courtney will provide more detail on the B15 form in the annual report section of this presentation later on. The SNS 60 form is also new for report year 2023. This form will replace the safety section that had previously been reported on the RR20 form. The SNS 60 will capture more detailed data related to safety and security events. Just like the B15 form, Courtney will provide more in detail on the SNS 60 and the data it collects in the annual report section of this presentation. Starting in report year 2023, agencies will be asked to report fuel types for their revenue vehicles on the existing A30 form. Once reported, this data will carry over year to year, just as other revenue vehicle data does. And in report year 2023, agencies will need to include an emergency contact on their P10 form. The emergency contact does not need to be an existing NTD user and should be a specific individual. Additionally, this contact should be someone from their subrecipient agency, not from the state. FTA will use the emergency contacts information to establish contact with the agency in the event of an emergency situation. Once the emergency contacts information has been entered, agencies will be asked to recertify or update the information in each consecutive report year. Awesome. Now we'll jump into a review of NTD fundamentals, where we will cover modes, types of service, revenue service definitions, and an overview of financial information. When reporting to the NTD, the service must be public. Once that is determined, the mode comes next. Here on this slide are the most common modes in the rural module: demand response and bus. Bus service is defined as a vehicle powered by a motor and containing fuel within. It can include services that have route deviation, point deviation, or deviated fixed routes. Demand response service is defined as a service scheduled in response to calls from passengers, such as a dial-a-ride. Another popular mode in the rural module is the commuter bus mode. We receive many questions on what is considered commuter bus versus regular bus. To clarify, commuter bus operates with more than 5 miles of closed door service, and the same type of vehicles are consistently operated on the service. If you think you have both bus and commuter bus service, please keep in mind that the vehicle should be used between the services on the same day. This also applies to drivers' work assignments, which are typically separate. If you are currently reporting both commuter bus and bus, and you believe that you may only need to report one, please contact your state DOT for assistance, and we can help them determine how it should be reported and provide steps on how to change this in the reporting system if appropriate. All right, the next topic we'll cover is types of service. Currently in the NTD, there are only two main types of service: directly operated and purchased transportation. Directly operated is when the service is operated by the agency and uses the agency's own employees. Purchased transportation is when the vehicles are operated by the seller's employees and the service is branded as the buyer's. And the buyer is paying the full cost of the service. Within the purchase transportation category, there are two types, taxi or TX for services operated by a taxi provider, TN for services operated by a transportation network company, or TNC. If the service is operated by a contractor that is neither a taxi provider nor a TNC, the type of service would remain PT or purchase transportation. After the mode and type of service is determined, the next question is what data should you be collecting for these services? Here are some of the data points, as well as the abbreviations that are used throughout this presentation and on the report. These data points are collected on a per mode and type of service basis, except for sponsored unlinked passenger trips, which are only collected by demand response mode types. These are common acronyms that you will see throughout the NTD materials and this presentation. We will first cover vehicle revenue miles and vehicle revenue hours, VRM and VRH. We will talk a lot about revenue service, so let's go ahead and define it. Revenue service is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or are able to transport passengers. This includes layover and recovery time. Revenue service does not include deadhead, driver training, school bus or charter services, and vehicle maintenance. As mentioned on the previous slide, deadhead is not reported in your revenue service. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or yard facility, changing routes, or when there is no expectation of carrying passengers. There are detailed tables found within the NTD policy manual, which provide further examples of what is and what is not considered revenue service. We will review these tables in a few slides. Some transportation services, such as emergency services and non-passenger services, are not reportable to the NTD, as they do not meet FTA's definition for public transportation. Please omit financial and service data for these services from your NTD report. The FTA defines public transportation as open to the general public. Although the NTD excludes services that are only open to specific groups of people, the NTD does accept transportation services for segments of the general population defined by age, disability, or low income. Additionally, FTA defines public transportation as being shared ride, which means that rides can be shared by passengers with no affiliation to one another. Floating vehicles are also used to provide quick response to breakdowns or passenger surplus. Floating vehicles miles and hours data is reportable to the NTD, but only when dispatched. Please do not report miles and hours data for floater vehicles that are on standby or have not been dispatched. Here's an example for the demand response mode of what is and what is not considered revenue service. Please note that the time and miles from when the vehicle is dispatched from the garage to pick up a passenger are not considered revenue service until they reach the pickup point. On the end of that example, the time and miles from the last drop-off back to the dispatching point are also not considered revenue service. Following up on the previous slide, this is a rundown of what is and what is not considered revenue service for the bus mode. Again, from the garage to the first stop of the route is not considered revenue service, and from the last drop-off point back to the garage is also not revenue service. Both of these tables are found in the policy manual and may be helpful to review if you have questions as to what to report for revenue service. FTA requires all public transportation modes to provide shared rides to be reportable to the NTD. However, in the case of an emergency, agencies may still report public transportation modes if ride sharing is temporarily suspended, as long as the service still meets the other transportation requirements. If a situation similar to this occurs, please contact your NTD analyst. Trip brokering is defined by the FTA as a central clearinghouse that connects riders traveling between similar origins and destinations at approximately the same time. This service is reportable if brokers connect riders from client-specific transportation services to public transportation. Agencies should report the service data and revenue received from this program as organization-paid fares. Please note that trip brokerage must still be considered public transportation to be reported to the NTD. Accepting passengers through a brokerage from a general public demand response program does not make the vehicles open to the public. Additionally, if a client-specific nonprofit provides trips assigned by the broker, then those trips are not public transportation and should not be reported. Unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, should represent the number of passenger boardings during the reporting period. Passengers are counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination. When reporting unlinked passenger trips, please include all passengers. These passengers are usually classified as either regular or sponsored. When reporting UPT on the RR20 form, this should be the total number of passenger trips, both regular and sponsored. For demand response, you will report sponsored trips as a subset of the total UPT. Sponsored trips are trips that are paid for in part or in full by a third party. These may be a part of a coordinated human services transportation plan. Common sponsors are the VA, Medicaid, and assisted living centers. As mentioned on the last slide, sponsored UPT should be reported as a subset of the total unlinked passenger trips for all demand response modes. Vehicles operated in annual maximum service, or VOMs, are the number of revenue vehicles an agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. VOMs are counted during the peak season of the year on the busiest day, but you'll want to exclude atypical days or special events. This count should include any volunteer vehicles that were used in maximum service. This shouldn't be the number of active vehicles your agency has in service, but rather how many vehicles are used at once during peak service during the fiscal year. NTD reporting requirements for financial data follow generally accepted accounting principles and accrual accounting. In accrual accounting, the revenue is recorded when earned, regardless of when payment is received. And expenses are recorded when the liability occurs, regardless of when the payment is actually made. Please see the examples here and in the policy manual for more detail. When reporting your data to the NTD, you will report the funding you spent, not the amount your agency was awarded. Here on the slide is an example. If your agency was awarded $275,000, but you only spent $178,000 during the fiscal year, you'll report the $178,000 instead of the $275,000 that was awarded to your agency. Next, we'll review the types of expenses. First up is operating expenses. Operating expenses are the day-to-day expenses that a transit agency incurs. These may be for operating and maintaining vehicles, maintaining other equipment, planning costs, admin costs, as well as other examples seen here on the slide. Capital expenses are those related to the purchase of equipment. Equipment means an article of non-expendable personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year. The equipment will have an acquisition cost which equals the lesser of the capitalization level established by the government unit for financial statement purposes, or $5,000 as determined by the FTA. Lastly, we will cover capital assistance spent on operations. This is when capital funding is spent on activities that are normally considered operating, such as preventative maintenance and the purchase of tires. Please make sure to break this out of your other operating funding, as this is a different match percentage. There is a separate field for this in the RR20 for certain funding sources such as 5311 seen here on the slide. If your agency has more than 2 modes, the operating costs will be broken out between the modes based on direct and shared expenses. Once the direct expenses for each mode are identified and broken out, the remaining shared expenses may be calculated between the 2 modes based on a cost allocation method. Please note that this is only acceptable for the shared expenses. There should be some expenses that are direct to each mode. Here's a quick overview of the TAM rule. Those that receive Chapter 5311 funds, or pardon, Chapter 53 funds, and either own, operate, or manage capital assets used in the provision of public transportation services are required to report data for their assets. For recipients of 5310B1D, if they do not provide public transportation services, they are not required to report under the TAM rule. With regards to how the data is reported, for those in the sponsored state DOT plan, you'll report the assets associated with the plan on your individual package. However, the targets and narrative report will come from the state DOT forms. If you have your own TAM plan, you will report all assets and targets and the narrative report. States may have Tier 2 participants as part of their TAM plan, and these will mostly consist of 5311, 5310, and small urban providers. States are required to sponsor a plan. However, agencies may opt out of the plan, but must submit the target and narrative report data themselves in their NTD report. We will mention capital responsibility a few times throughout this presentation, especially in regards to TAM plans. So please see the list here to determine whether or not an agency has direct capital responsibility for an asset. As a note, for the third bullet point, an infrastructure asset itemized as a capital line item in the budget does not necessarily mean an agency has direct capital responsibility. An agency must also have management or oversight responsibilities for the line item project. In addition, performing minimal preventative maintenance work doesn't necessarily indicate capital responsibility. All right, we will review the NTD interface and account user management now. The NTD homepage is found at www.transit.dot.gov/NTD. This is where data products, policy manuals, and the clickable link to go to the reporting system are all housed. You will click on the blue link that reads, "If you are a non-FTA user, click this link to log in." From there, it will prompt you to log in via login.gov. When logging in, please make sure to set this up with the same email address you use for NTD reporting. In addition to an email and password, login.gov will require the use of at least one secondary authentication method, such as a code delivered through a text message or a phone call. Once this is set up, whichever method was chosen when creating your login.gov account will be used when logging into the NTD reporting system. After logging in, all users land on the home page. The Appian platform, which houses NTD, trams, and faces, is home to it all. Here you will select NTD in order to access your report. If you would like to automatically go into the NTD site every time you log in, you can click on that star at the top right of the NTD box, and this will save your preference. The NTD homepage allows the user to directly access their NTD report from the front page by either selecting the folder icon or the pencil icon. Next is the Tasks tab. This section will house any tasks that are assigned to you. To access your report packages, you'll want to ensure that you are on the home page first. From here, you will select the Annual tab, and it will populate any open NTD reports for your agency. You can access the forms one of two ways. You can either click on the NTD ID with the folder icon on the left, which will direct you to the report package summary page. This route will also allow you to access the related actions for the package. But if you want to go directly to the forms, you can click on the pencil icon on the right side of the page, and the system will take you directly to the clickable list of forms for you to edit. To access the reporter profiles, you'll still want to be on the front page there, the home page. You will select profile, and your agency profile will load. The profile option is where you will edit your mode, your agency basic information, as well as view other users from your agency. To view the individual forms, you will click on the pencil icon on the right side of the page, which will allow you to access the P10, the P20, and the other profile forms. To access other profile options, you can click on the NTD ID folder icon on the left. Once you click on the NTD ID folder icon on the left, you will see the profile summary page. Here you can go through related actions to edit the P forms. The new emergency contact information will be located within the P10 form, as seen in this screenshot. Please enter in this information for report year 2023. Next is the e-file library. This is where you can filter through communications from prior years, as well as this report year. And the form library, which is where you can see data from previous years that has been submitted to the NTD. You will use the drop-down menu here to select the package, and then the link in blue for whichever form you want. These will be downloaded in HTML format. In addition to viewing the forms, under the Related Action tab of the profile, you'll be able to print the previous year's report packages in full rather than form by form in the form library. Other options you can complete here are viewing and editing the profile forms. So the P10 basic information form, the P20 or mode form, the P30, which is to review users from your agency, as well as the P50, which is where the new fixed route GTFS links will be housed. This image does not currently show the P50 form, but the form should be available now in the system. If you choose to print your annual package, you will be taken to a new page where you will click on the refresh button until the link comes up for you to download the file. And then once the file is ready and you click refresh, you'll be redirected to the previous page. And here on the slide, you can see near the red arrow, a downloadable file link will appear after it populates. If you are already a user in the system and need to unlock your account, there are two different ways to complete this. You can either unlock your own account if you've set up security questions, which we'll go over on the next slide, or you can submit an unlock request. If you submit an unlock request, the request will go to the user managers at the state DOT. It is important to note that even if you are locked out, you can still log into the NTD system. However, reports will not be available to you until you are unlocked using either of the two options. As mentioned, if you've set up your security questions beforehand, you will be able to unlock yourself. To set up these questions, go to the top right-hand corner of your screen after logging in and select Profile, then Related Actions, and then Manage Security Questions. From there, you will be able to follow the steps to set them up. Self-reporting subrecipients have the ability to enter and edit data for their own forms. This privilege is granted by the state DOT and is completely optional and at the state DOT's discretion. While the self-reporting subrecipient can edit and save forms, the state DOT is ultimately the one who will submit the report. Subrecipients should contact the state DOT for any questions or technical assistance needed. While completing the report. All correspondence with NTD analysts should go through the state DOT contact. Again, the due dates your state may impose on you may be different from the NTD deadlines. Sorry, skip ahead there. Now that you've logged in and have access to the system, Courtney is going to show you how to go through the forms and validation.
All right, thank you, Reed. I just want to do a really quick audio check to make sure everyone can hear me. Lori, can you just confirm that you can hear me loud and clear?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for confirming. So again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Courtney Springer, and I will be taking us through how to complete the annual report for 2023. Here's a quick refresher on the Rural General Public Transit Reporter type, as well as a list of the annual report forms. This list may already be familiar to you, but you will notice that there are two new forms included in this list, the B15 Geographic Area Coverage form and the SNS 60 Safety Data form. We will cover each of these forms in more detail in the upcoming sections. To access your report, navigate to the NTD homepage and ensure the Annual tab is open, and then select your agency's report package from this list. From the report package summary view, select the Annual Forms button in the top right-hand corner to open the editable list of forms. Once the list of forms is open, select the hyperlinked form name to begin. The first form we will review is the Basic Information, or B10 form. If you completed an annual NTD report last year, the organization type you selected will carry over into this year's form, but you may update this selection if needed by using the dropdown to select your agency's organization type. Please also enter the fiscal year end date that corresponds to the 12-month period in which you are reporting your 2023 data. The auxiliary sections are typically rare for rural agencies, so please do not complete this section without discussing it first with your state DOT contact. And when you have completed this form, select Save and Validate. Next, we will discuss the new Geographic Area Coverage B15 form. As a reminder, this form will only appear in your report if you operate a demand response, or DR mode. So for each demand response mode and type of service combination you report, you will respond to 10 questions per mode and type of service in this form. And the questions will be dynamic based on your selections to the previous questions. We will review each of the 10 questions just throughout screenshots of the report form. So question 1 asks if you serve residents in another state besides your state. Select yes or no. Question 2 allows you to select the counties that your agency serves, either in whole or in part. You should start by selecting the Add button, after which you can choose your state and report the counties. Question 3 allows you to select the census designated places, or CDPs, that are served in these counties. The Census Bureau's TigerWeb application allows you to view census designated places within your county or counties selected. So we do encourage you to review this resource. You can then select the service level by indicating whether the census places are wholly served or partially served. Question 4 asks if any portion of your demand response service is intended to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, complementary paratransit requirements for a fixed route system. Select yes or no. If you select yes, question 5 will ask if your service area is limited to your own NTD ID. So if it is, of course, select yes. If the ADA service serves other NTD reporters, select no. And if you do select no, you should search for and select all other NTD IDs that your ADA service covers. Question 6 asks if you have different passenger eligibility requirements or different terms and conditions of service. Select yes or no. Question 7 asks which days per week you operate, for which you should select all of the applicable checkboxes. When you are done, select Create Days of the Week on the right-hand side of this page, which will populate question 8. For question 8, you will report the service begin and end time for each day, and you will also answer basic questions about these services as seen in the column headers under question 8 shown in this screenshot. And if you have any questions about these specific items, please contact your state DOT, who will reach out to their NTD validation analyst if they have further questions. Question 9 asks for the minimum advanced reservation time for your service. Enter the numeric minimum and then indicate whether that number corresponds to days or hours. And finally, question 10 asks for the fare charged for this service. You should not include donations in this field. Again, we do understand that this is a new form, and so again, we encourage you to contact your state DOT if you have any questions about the reporting requirements, and your state DOT contact will follow up with their NTD validation analyst if they'd like further clarification. Next, we will discuss the A10 Stations and Maintenance Facilities form. The A10 captures the type and number of maintenance facilities your agency utilizes for public transit. Report facilities based on the ownership types for these facilities, so whether they are owned by your agency, leased from another public agency, or leased from a private entity. The definition of maintenance facility is a garage or building where mechanics perform routine maintenance and repairs and typically serve as operating garages. Please note that you should not include bus barns in this count, nor should you include any third-party facility where you might bring your vehicles for repairs, such as a Jiffy Lube. If one facility is shared by 2 or more modes, you should report an allocated share between the applicable modes. So this could be based on any data point that indicates how much of the facility is used per mode, but one of the most common approaches is to allocate a facility based on the number of vehicles it services. To look at an example, let's say an agency owns one maintenance facility and operates both a demand response service and a fixed route bus service. And both modes use this maintenance facility, and the agency owns 20 vehicles in total. The demand response mode runs 15 vehicles, and the bus mode runs 5 vehicles. In this example, we would expect to see 0.75 facilities reported in the demand response A10 form and 0.25 facilities reported on the bus A10 form. Please ensure that the total number of facilities you report across all A10 forms comes to a whole number. Next, we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory A15 form. The A15 form collects basic information on facilities that your agency uses to supply public transit service. On this form, you should report administrative and maintenance facilities for which your agency has capital responsibility, and you should also report all passenger and parking facilities that your agency uses in public transit service, regardless of who has capital responsibility for those facilities. Please note that if your agency reports a maintenance facility as owned on the A10 form, we would generally expect that facility to appear on the A15 form as well, as long as your agency's transit use for that facility is greater than incidental. To complete this form, select the Add New button, followed by Add Facility. This will allow you to begin entering data for that facility. You will complete 3 sections per entry, and those are update facility information, update condition assessment, and update address. Because of the new reporting requirements for 2023, we will not be able to dedicate time to going over each of these form sections. But we do again encourage you to review the NTD policy manual or contact your state DOT if you have questions about any specific report fields or definitions in this form. Existing facility information will pre-populate from the prior year, so you will only need to add new facilities as needed or update the information for existing facilities as needed. If you do not have any reportable facilities, please select the No Data to Report checkbox at the bottom of this form prior to saving. Next, we will review the Revenue Vehicle Inventory A30 form. If you completed this form last year, your data from report year 2022 will pre-populate, which again means you will only need to add new fleets or edit existing fleets as needed. You can enter new fleets by selecting the Add New Fleet button towards the left, or you can edit an existing fleet by selecting the blue RVI ID link for that fleet towards the left of the table. When adding a new fleet, the first section you will see is basic information, so please complete all of the required fields for this fleet. The next section is vehicle information. Again, complete all required fields in this section. Please note that a new field, fuel type, as Reed mentioned, will be required starting in report year 2023. You should select your fleet's fuel type from a drop-down menu. Please complete this field for all new and existing fleets starting this report year. Transit agencies must report the number of active vehicles in each fleet as of the end of their fiscal year. Total vehicles represents how many vehicles there are in the fleet you are reporting, while active vehicles indicate the number of vehicles that provide regular service and includes spare vehicles. Inactive vehicles may include any of the following: vehicles that are awaiting sale or disposal, vehicles that are in storage or are part of an FTA-approved emergency contingency plan, or vehicles that are out for major repairs. As a quick reporting reminder, please remember to mark fleets as retired in the reporting system if the vehicles have been sold or disposed of, rather than deleting the fleets. To retire a fleet, update the number of active vehicles to 0, which will prompt a question that you see here asking, is this fleet retired? For which you should select yes. Fleets should only be deleted if they were added to the form in error, or if you are removing a duplicate fleet after using the Add Existing Fleet function. The next form is the Service Vehicle Inventory, or A35 form. Agencies must report service vehicle fleets for which they have capital responsibility. Service vehicles include cars used for administrative staff, transit police cars, and tow trucks. Because service vehicles must be roadworthy in order to be reported, agencies should not report small forklifts or golf carts or any type of construction equipment that is not roadworthy. This form works in a similar manner as the A15 form, so to create a fleet, select Add New. Please ensure that you report revenue vehicles on the A30 form and service vehicles on the A35 form. In other words, you should not report vehicles on the A35 form if the vehicles are used to transport passengers. Those vehicles should only be captured on the A30 form. Report the service fleet information for this vehicle fleet. Select the vehicle type from a drop-down menu, which consists of 3 options: automobiles, trucks and other rubber-tired vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. Automobiles are passenger cars up to and including station wagons in size. If you have a service vehicle that is a minivan or anything larger, report them as trucks and other rubber tire vehicles. Some other noteworthy fields in this form is estimated cost. which is the most recent estimate of the full cost to replace the fleet. If you do not have a recent estimate, you may report the original cost of the fleet or its insured value. And you must also report the year that corresponds to the dollar value that you report. Save and validate the 835 form once you are finished. And again, if you do not have any reportable service vehicles, please select the No Data to Report checkbox prior to saving the form. The Rural General Public Transit Reduced Reporting RR20 form contains your agency's financial, service, and resource data. When you open the RR20 form, the first two sections are total funds expended and funds expended by mode. The funds expended by mode section allows you to manually input your operating and capital expenses for each mode that you operate. In this example shown in the screenshot, this agency only operates the bus mode or MBDO and reported an annual total of $150,000 for operating expenses and $75,000 for capital expenses. You will be required to identify the different sources of funds that supported your transit system, which we will cover in the next few slides. As you begin to report your funding sources, the system will automatically calculate a running total in the total funds expended section. So again, in this example, the agency has reported all of their funding sources, which totaled $150,000 for operations and $75,000 for capital. The sum of your funding sources typically match what you enter as your total funds expended, as shown in this screenshot. Agencies that operate more than one mode are required to capture and report actual expenses by mode and type of service. If you have more than one mode, you should determine which expenses are direct expenses and can be easily traced to a specific mode. Direct expenses may include driver wages or vehicle repairs for specific modes. For the remaining joint or shared expenses, which are costs that are incurred for the benefit of more than one mode and cannot be traced, you may allocate those remaining costs. An example of shared costs may be a transit manager's salary that supports both the demand response and fixed route services. You may allocate shared costs by using an allocation factor such as vehicle revenue miles, unlinked passenger trips, vehicle revenue hours, or number of employees per mode. The next section of the RR20, which begins the different funding source categories, is fare revenues. Fare revenues include all income received and expended directly from passengers. This section is broken down between passenger-paid fares and organization-paid fares. Passenger-paid fares are those which are traditionally considered as passenger fares, so in which a rider pays to board the vehicle. And this includes full adult fares, senior citizen fares, student fares, child fares, and fares for individuals with disabilities. Please note that this section also includes donations that are made on board a vehicle in lieu of paying a fare. Organization-paid fares are those that an organization pays for or pays through a third party rather than the passenger. One common example of an organization-paid fare is a university paying a transit agency to allow students to ride fare-free. Additionally, funds expended from Medicaid for non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, should be reported as an organization-paid fare. If your agency operates more than one mode, you must capture and report the fares by mode and type of service. There are some exceptions to this requirement as listed here. And if your agency's fare policy meets either of these criteria, please notify your state contact so that they can communicate that to their analyst during validation if needed. In most cases, fare revenues can be tracked for each mode and therefore should be reported as actual data and not allocated. The next funding source in the form is other directly generated funds, which are funds other than fares that your agency directly generates. Some common examples of other directly generated funds are advertising revenues, concession revenues, fundraisers, park and ride revenues, interest on investments, contract revenue for any non-full cost contracts, and donations and insurance recoveries. And please note, when we say donations for this field, this refers to lump sum donations that may come from local charity foundations or fundraising events or private individual donors. This does not refer to donations that were made on board the vehicle, which should be reported as fares. If you report funds to this field, a required text description box will appear. Revenues accrued through a purchased transportation or PT agreement should only be reported if your agency receives revenues from another agency who pays the full cost of a transit service you provide, as long as it meets the NTD definition of purchased transportation. It really is not common for rural agencies to report funds to this field, so please discuss this with your state contact if you think this field applies to your service. The next funding source category is non-federal funds. Enter the data based on what funds your agency expended from local funds, state funds, and other non-federal sources. Local sources include tax levies, general funds, and finances from local entities. State sources include state programs that support public transit but do not include the Chapter 53 funds that a state DOT may pass through to your agency, since Chapter 53 funds are federal in origin. If you report other funds, similar to other directly generated funds, a text description box will appear, so please ensure that you enter an accurate description of those funds. In the federal fund section, select all applicable federal funding sources from this list of programs. Once you select a box, the corresponding data entry fields will populate to the right. If you report funds to any other category, such as other federal funds or other FTA funds, you will be required to provide a text description to describe that funding program. Some examples of other FTA funds include those not already listed on the RR20 form, such as Section 5308 FTA Clean Fuels Program. Examples of other federal funds include funds from a non-FTA or non-DOT federal grant not already listed in this form, such as Housing and Urban Development or HUD funds, or Department of Health and Human Services or HHS funds. Other US DOT funds will include funds that come from the Department of Transportation that are not FTA funds, such as funds from the Federal Highway Administration. Various COVID-19 relief programs, such as the CARES Act, CRISA Act, and American Rescue Plan Acts, are listed separately on the RR20 form. These programs provide emergency assistance and healthcare response for individuals, families, and businesses affected by the COVID-19 public health emergency. Please report funds expended from these programs to the appropriate field. After you complete the financial data section, complete the other resources section if it is applicable to your agency. Please report the number of volunteer drivers and/or the number of personal vehicles in service as applicable. Please note that you do not report personal vehicles on the A30 form as revenue vehicles. You should only report them in this section. If this section does not apply to your agency, please enter zeros into these data entry fields rather than leaving the fields blank. The next section in the form is annual service data. When reporting miles and hours, you should only include those miles and hours in which your transit vehicles are operating in revenue service, which is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or have the capacity to transport passengers. Unlinked passenger trips should reflect each instance in which a passenger boards a vehicle and should include personal care attendants who ride fare-free. Please note that while you report sponsored service on linked passenger trips for certain modes in a separate data entry field, the total unlinked passenger trips should represent all ridership for the year, including regular and sponsored trips. So in other words, you should not deduct sponsored UPT from your total UPT. If you do not have a group plan sponsor and have your own transit asset management or TAM plan, you will fill out the A90 Transit Asset Management Performance Measure Targets form. If your state DOT is your agency's group TAM plan sponsor, you will see a read-only version of the group's A90 form. The A90 form reflects the performance measure and performance targets for any assets for which your agency has capital responsibility. The performance measure relates to your agency's assets that have met or exceeded the useful life benchmark for vehicles or based on the condition assessment for facilities. You should also upload your agency's narrative report at the bottom of the form. The narrative report outlines the targets your agency set in this form, the progress towards those targets, and any changes within your transit system's operating environment. And again, if you have a group plan sponsor, the sponsor will report on behalf of their participants, and the form will represent the plan for the whole group. Next, we will discuss the new Safety and Security SNS 60 form. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, requires the NTD to collect data related to assaults on transit workers. The statutory definition of assault on a transit worker is a circumstance in which an individual knowingly, without lawful authority or permission, and with intent to endanger the safety of any individual, or with a reckless disregard for the safety of human life, interferes with, disables, or incapacitates a transit worker while the transit worker is performing their duties. The requirement applies to reduced and rural reporters who already reported a summary of safety data to the NTD in previous years. The requirement also applies to asset-only reporters who will begin reporting safety data in report year 2023. Assaults can be classified into two categories, physical and non-physical. Physical assaults involve physical contact with the transit worker and can include any contact with the attacker's body, a weapon, a projectile, or another item. Physical assaults can also include the assailant's saliva as well. Non-physical assaults do not involve any physical contact and can include threats, intimidation, or interfering with the worker's duties. The SNS 60 form is only available to reduced reporters, rural general public transit subrecipients, and asset-only subrecipients. The former safety data section in the RR20 form has been retired, so you will not see the old incidents, injuries, and fatalities fields in that form this year. Those fields have been moved to the SNS 60 form, where they've also been expanded to include more detailed data. The sections that RGPT subrecipients will complete are physical assaults, non-physical assaults, and all other reportable safety and security data. Asset-only subrecipients are only required to complete the sections for physical assaults and non-physical assaults. They will not complete the sections for all other reportable safety and security data. Reportable events occur on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility or maintenance facility, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle and meets a reporting threshold. For a safety event to be reportable, it must meet a reporting threshold, which can include the following: a fatality confirmed within 30 days of the event, an injury requiring immediate medical attention away from the scene for one or more persons, property damage equal to or exceeding $25,000, collisions involving transit revenue vehicles that require towing away from the scene for either a transit vehicle or another non-transit vehicle, or an evacuation of a transit facility or vehicle for life safety reasons. You should exclude events that occur at bus stops or bus shelters that are not on transit-owned property unless it involves boarding, alighting, or involving a transit vehicle. You should also exclude events that occur off transit property where the affected persons come to rest on transit property after the event. Here is an overview of the pre-BIL and post-BIL reporting requirements and how safety data reporting will change starting in report year 2023. The key data elements now include assaults on transit workers. The reporting population has also been expanded to include asset-only reporters. The reporting scope has not changed, as agency types listed above will continue to report safety data only on an annual basis. And additionally, the collection timeframe is also consistent with previous years, as the SNS 60 data will be included with the annual report package, which is due 4 months following your state's fiscal year end. One key update to safety reporting is that agencies must report additional details regarding bus collision fatalities. Agencies previously reported these types of events, but only reported a count of injuries or a count of fatalities as general safety incidents. They did not specify whether the injury or fatality resulted from an impact with the bus. The SNS 60 form will provide fields for these additional event types, including collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, or collisions with an other category, which can include things such as an animal or a manhole. There is also a field for other major events, which are safety events that meet one of the reporting thresholds mentioned earlier, but are not specifically one of the collision types listed above. Fires are one example of a major event type for safety reporting. So if there is a fire on transit property that perhaps results in an injury or property damage exceeding $25,000, you would report that to this field. Finally, there is a field where you will report injuries from non-major events. Again, we encourage you to contact your state DOT if you have questions about any of these fields, and they'll reach out to their analyst if they would like more information. Here is a screenshot of the SNS 60 form that depicts the physical assaults and non-physical assaults sections. The columns represent the various location types where assaults may happen. So the options are physical assaults in transit vehicle, physical assaults in revenue facility, physical assaults in non-revenue facility, and physical assaults in other location. The rows represent the total event counts for major safety and security events and non-major events. For all injuries and fatalities, you must report them based on the person type, including operators, other transit workers, and other. The same rows and columns appear in the non-physical assaults table. Here is a screenshot of the bottom portion of the SNS 60 form, which includes all other reportable safety and security data. The columns may look familiar to you if you completed an NTD report in the past. Previously, we only collected a summary of event counts, fatality counts, and injury counts, but now you will report them based on the event types as listed on the left. Again, the types include collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, collisions with other major events, which again are non-collision events that meet a reporting threshold. The last row represents total reportable injuries which stem from non-major events. That was an overview of the report forms for a rural general public transit subrecipient. So next, we will discuss some common reporting challenges agencies may face while completing the annual report. Reporting challenges can take shape in a variety of ways, including understanding the NTD policies, completing data entry correctly, completing all of the required forms and fields in the report, and accurately addressing validation issues. Analysts will send reports back with open issues if they have follow-up questions regarding the report data. Validation includes, but is not limited to, time series checks against your agency's historical data, logic checks between data items on different forms, and checks for values that may fall outside of the typical industry range. To resolve validation issues, you can either revise the data if the data requires a correction, or provide a text explanation that addresses the issue. Another common reporting issue relates to allocating operating expenses. As a reminder, agencies may not allocate their total annual operating expenses. Rather, they must first determine which expenses are direct costs and attribute those costs to the appropriate mode. Agencies may then allocate the remaining shared costs to each mode and type of service afterwards. Another validation issue reporters may experience is reporting the appropriate funding sources for their service. Please ensure that your agency reports all funds that support your public transit service, rather than only reporting, for example, just the federal funding sources. Please also ensure that your agency reports the funding sources to the correct line item year over year, such as local funds or state funds, other directly generated funds, and 5311 federal funds. Agencies should only report service data for when they are performing revenue service. Revenue service does not include deadhead, therefore deadhead should not be included in the data that is reported to the NTD. Deadhead is when transit vehicles are operating closed door and do not carry passengers. This includes leaving or returning to the garage, or heading to or from the starting or ending points of revenue service. Deadhead can also include changing routes or when the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers. Vehicle revenue miles is an apportionment formula factor for 5311 funds, so this data is validated closely. When reporting vehicles operated in maximum service or BOMs, agencies might erroneously report 100% of their active vehicle inventory as their BOMs. But this would only be correct if your agency operated all of its active vehicles during peak service during the year. However, agencies typically retain spare vehicles that do not necessarily operate during peak service times. If the VOMs you report on the RR20 form is identical to the number of active vehicles you report on the A30 form, the state's validation analyst just may ask about this during validation for confirmation. When reporting a new vehicle, it is typical that an agency will report the corresponding capital expenses for that vehicle on the RR20. One validation issue that comes up is that agencies will either report the new vehicles on the A30 form or the capital expenses on the RR20 form, but not both. Additionally, please note that when you report capital expenses for a vehicle that is used for more than one mode, you must report the full expense to the predominant mode that uses the vehicle the most, rather than splitting the capital vehicle cost between modes. So do not allocate capital expenses in this way. Agencies must inventory the vehicles that they use to provide public transit service on their A30 form if the vehicles have not been sold or disposed of at the end of the fiscal year. The inventory on your A30 form should represent a snapshot of the last day of the fiscal year, and new vehicles must be reported in the first fiscal year when they become available for service. After your state DOT submits the report, there are a couple more steps that must be taken in order to completely close out the report for that year. The state's validation analyst will review the entire report for accuracy and consistency. They will compare the data in this year's report to data submitted in last year's report to look for any significant changes, ensure that all forms have been completed, and check to see that the data has been reported to the correct fields. If the state's analyst asks about any data changes from last year to this year, please avoid providing generalized responses such as the data is correct, as these types of responses do not offer a clear explanation for why the data changed. The more information or context you can provide early in the reporting process, you can help reduce the number of report turnovers before closeout. Here is one example of a validation issue within the asset module. An agency reports a bus as being 35 feet long in year 1, but updates this value to 25 feet in year 2. In this case, a validation check will fire as vehicle length typically does not change year over year. There are two main possibilities in this scenario. One possibility is that the data was reported incorrectly in the previous year and the agency made a data correction in the current year. In this case, the agency would simply provide this explanation in validation and would not update this year's data. The second possibility is that the agency erroneously updated the data in year 2 and the original data from year 1 was actually correct. So in this case, the agency would need to navigate back to their A30 form, revert the vehicle length back to 35, and resave the form. Once the analyst has reviewed the report, he or she will return it to the state to resolve the open validation issues. As the report revision count increases, the revision time period decreases, since the report should have fewer and fewer issues with each submission. Be sure to address any items that were cited in last year's closeout letter, so from report year 2022. If you fail to correct any issues stated in last year's closeout letter, that data may be marked as questionable for the current validation year. This is a summary of the annual report package. This table lists the number of open issues as well as total issues. You should focus on the number of open issues, as open issues will prevent the state from being able to submit the report package. The table also shows which forms have been validated, which will appear as green, and forms that have not been validated, which appear as red. So looking at this screenshot, none of these forms have been validated yet since they are all appearing as red. And just to recap, each report form has a regular save button as well as a save and validate button. If you save and validate the form will appear as green in the summary table. But if you make any changes to that form afterwards, you must save and validate that form again. So if you make changes to a form that has already been validated, if you hit the normal save button, the form will revert back to red and will not turn green again until you press save and validate. There are two ways to view your validation issues. The first way is to open an individual report form. So in this example, it's the RR20 form. Scroll down the page and then click on View Issues to review the issues. The other way is to review your issues from the summary page. And this will open a page that contains all of the validation issues in your report across all of the forms. On the issues page, a list will appear containing your open issues. If you click on the issue line item once, it will highlight in dark blue. And after the issue highlights, you can scroll down the page to review a description of that particular issue. You can either comment in the comment box with an explanation and save your response, or you can click on the button that says View Related Form towards the bottom to make updates to that particular report form if needed. Notes in the closeout letter will typically relate to incomplete reports, which could mean either the data does not conform with NTD definitions or accounting principles, or it could mean that the agency did not adequately respond to validation issues raised by the analyst. If you respond to a validation issue and notice that the state's analyst has kept the issue open with a follow-up question, please do not copy your original response and paste it as your follow-up response. Please also avoid copying and pasting the same response across multiple validation checks if the checks are asking about different service characteristics. All identified issues must be fully addressed in order for the issue to be resolved. When any of these issues occur, FTA will cite them in the closeout letter. The best way to resolve validation issues is to provide thorough and detailed explanations that give the state's analyst a clear picture of your agency's transit service. Explain why the data changed from year to year, or what service changes took place to cause a significant increase or decrease in your data. If you find that last year's data was incorrect, please provide the correct value if you have it, or provide an explanation for either why it was wrong or for why this year's data is correct. Please note that FTA does not accept this response for multiple consecutive report years. Here is the contact information for our team, as well as the NTD Help Desk, which is open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you again to everyone for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your attendance. And I will now turn it back over to Lori to close us out.
Thank you, Courtney. Oh, wait, let me turn my video on. Hi again. There does not seem to be any open questions, and there's not much in the chat. So I guess this really truly is the closeout of the webinar. While I'm talking, if you have any last minute questions, kind of need to get them in real fast, and I'll try to talk real slow. But all I'm going to say is that we thank everyone for participating, especially our presenters, Courtney and Reed. Thank you so much. You will be getting an evaluation. Everyone, not just Courtney and Reed. Everyone will be getting an evaluation link in their email. We really appreciated your time to just give us some feedback on how we're doing and how the session went. And if there's no more questions, which it appears to be the case, I'll give everyone back their afternoon. Thank you so much. And I'll see some of you on Thursday at our next webinar. Thanks.